Richard Keating is the Managing Director for Architecture and Design at Jacobs in Los Angeles, and we're going to speak about a little about tall buildings, but more about urban habitat, which largely gets ignored, but it's a very important component. Tell me about your work in urban habitat and the kinds of things you're dealing with right now, the kinds of issues.
Well, I was involved with the council back when it changed its name from Council on Tall Buildings to Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat. And I thought that was a wise move at the time, just because I thought it balanced out the relationship of just looking at the super tall or tall buildings at the time as technology and technological objects, and balanced it with more societal needs. I think because we've seen so many of the wonderful buildings that have been built recently, and the engineering being such a kind of a glorious part of our achievement, we focused as the council quite a lot more on the first part of the name than the second part of the name. This particular proceeding, I sense there's quite a bit more desire for rebalancing and getting back to the underlying reasons for these tall buildings, which in fact is the press towards urbanism, as we talked about.
I think that's very obvious when you walk around Shanghai. Well, just when you walk out of this building, it seems like the environment, some have said, is much more made for cars than it is pedestrians.
Yeah, all of Pudong is.
And this part of town is really, if you're a pedestrian, kind of hard to get around, even though it's fascinating as it is. So that would certainly make the case that you really can't have one without the other.
Yep, I think that's fundamental. Just fundamental.
Tell me about some of the projects you're working on right now.
Well, the one that has the most bearing on urban habitat is actually for the King of Morocco, and who's, I think in a very exciting way, has reached out to all of the primary corporations in Morocco and asked them to build presently as much as they can for their employees in terms of housing, in terms of education, in terms of community, and recreation. And in doing that, the objective is to create a cadre of people that are in the country of Morocco that are A, employed, but B, employed more importantly in construction, and that includes architecture and engineering, so that after the spate of building is completed in Morocco, Morocco will be the go-to country for Africa to come to in the near future when Africa does reach its level of maturity, which is all expected. So I'm doing 3 new towns and corporate headquarters and a renovation of something about the size of Canary Wharf.
So the pendulum is starting to swing the other way, where first we saw a very large concentration on tall building development, which we're still seeing. But are we seeing more concentration on urban design now?
I believe so.
As a product,
so.
Is it a natural reaction to what's happened?
I'm not sure it's a reaction. I just sat in on one of the conferences meetings here earlier, and Adrian's office was looking at a master plan almost identical, a little smaller than one of mine, but it's. We were speaking of it last night, just the real reasons of underlying China's expansion, and to accommodate all of the people, not just the elite. There has to be a stronger look at urban design and urban character.
You've made the case before that America really doesn't have the economy to support super tall buildings, and China, of course, has a great need for them. How are the cities in China evolving differently than cities in America or in the West?
Well, I think I misspoke about, I used the word, it doesn't have the economy. Of course America has the economy to do whatever it wants. But the will is what's really it, and the political will. So many of our cities, especially in the car culture parts of the Sun Belt, are not interested in tall buildings because each politician that has to make a decision about something like that is beholden to somebody who's worried about shadows in their backyard or more traffic. And very much of a problem politically. It's a kind of a gridlock. Not only the gridlock in Washington, even in how cities and urban form develop. So I think it's possible in America, but it's going to be a while before we move many of those cities. And I'm now talking about everything in the whole Sun Belt region and then the suburbs of even the existing cities. To be able to move those cities to much more transit-oriented development. Once that transit-oriented development is really in place, then I think you'll see higher and higher densities. Perhaps not super tall, but we'll see.
It is September of 2012 as we speak. We've been following this latest generation of super tall buildings for probably 15 years now, roughly the late 1990s. 15 years from now, roughly 2030. The range 2030 to 2050, what are cities going to look like 20 to 30 years from now?
Well, I don't think we're ever going to get away from using a very tall building as an emblematic feature. I mean, they're thrilling, and they're thrilling to the same modern heart as they were to the 12th century heart that first saw cathedrals being built in France, or the first person who turned a stone upright and parked it in Stonehenge. And so I think we will always have that as a marker, as the inherent underlying reason for these buildings. But I do believe structurally and also from a city building standpoint, there's a great deal of desire to bring the ground plane up into these towers. And the way to do it, of course, is the decks that connect buildings. So the connectivity that you could imagine easily would lead to groups of buildings that might be connected together. And perhaps there are 3 or 4 of these tall buildings, housing being relatively thin as a floor plate for people to live within it. But the taller it gets, the harder it is to support it. But when you have 3 or 4 of them connected together, you can use the structural logic of the connectors and those connectors for open space. So I would imagine you'd see cities that evolve towards that type of high-rise, very tall buildings. And I think they will be at the center of moments of pride, or certainly at the center of transportation systems.
You've been with the council for a long time.
Almost from the beginning.
And this is really a great step for the council and for a lot of people to have this Congress here in Shanghai.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean, and what should we be looking to take away from here?
I think we, in Americans at least, and those of us from Chicago, I still count myself as a Chicago person, no, I'm saying that for your sake, I believe, but we have never experienced, even in Houston, the speed of growth that's going on in China. And the speed of growth and the accommodation of that growth. And last year when we were in Mumbai, it was impressive as well, because the numbers of people moving from the countryside to the cities are so much beyond the normal American experience that I think coming from to visit cities like Mumbai and Shanghai is really, really beneficial to our thinking.
It's been a huge eye-opener just walking around Shanghai and seeing the magnificent growth here and the conditions that it creates. And it's my opinion, and I'm sure it's yours too, that anybody from the West needs to come here and see this place just because it is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to thank you for dropping by and seeing us in Shanghai, because it's been a very, very productive meeting this week, and very educational and informative to say the least. But Richard Keating from Jacobs in Los Angeles, thank you.
Good night and good luck.